I'm very, very, very excited to be here today for Judaism at Great Heights. And we have three wonderful friends here with me today to share with you some exciting things. And are you all ready? I can't hear you. Are you ready? Yeah, we are ready. So my name is Rachel Raz, and I am the founder of, it's called the Space Torah Project. The Space Torah Project was designed to preserve the journey and story of NASA astronaut Jeff Hoffman, who is here with us today, and also to share it with as many people. So I'm very happy to share it here today, and hopefully to inspire. So I'm delighted to be here today. And so with us is Jeff. You can see some photos of Jeff up there. Jeff on the left. Jeff, can you tell us on the picture of the left, what do we see there?
That is me in a spacesuit. You'll have to take my word for it. It really was me, and I am standing on the end of the robotic arm of the Space Shuttle Endeavour when we went up to fix the Hubble Space Telescope, which is still taking beautiful pictures, even though that was more than 30 years ago.
Yeah, and Jeff went on 5 space missions and fixed the Hubble Space Telescope, as he mentioned, and he went on 4 spacewalks. So, and lots of many other exciting things that we're going to share with you today. And with us also, Nikki. This is very special. Nikki climbed the 7 highest mountains in each continent, which is huge, including Mount Everest. And yeah, so I actually watched the film Everest this week, and I was like, they're crazy. But it seems like amazing, and we're going to hear about her experience. And there is a new book that we're going to share in a little bit. It's called Passover on Everest, because Nikki celebrated Passover on Everest. And Nikki, can you tell us something about the picture on the left?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is, who's seen a waterfall? Can you put up your hand? Okay, now keep your hand up if you've climbed up a waterfall. You have? Wow. So a waterfall is... So did you climb up while it was water or while it was ice? Jeff has a really good question. While it was water, yeah.
That's much easier.
Yeah, so this waterfall is frozen ice, and it's very cold, and the only way to get up is with big axes that you chip into the ice, and then you've got little spikes on your feet, so you make a spike, and then you put your axe up, and you go all the way up, and sometimes there's 3 or 4 waterfalls all put together, and you climb up as you go.
It's amazing.
There's a rope, definitely.
and Nikki usually lives in Australia, but how do you get the rope out?
The person in the front puts in screws and brings the rope up, and the people behind climb up. It's a great question.
How do they get up there first, and then they screw it on, and then they wait there?
The strongest person goes up first, and they put all the screws in and the rope.
Yeah, and this friend, Rachelle, and thanks to her, we actually have both Nikki and Jeff today, because Rachelle is an author. And Rachelle wrote over 20 books, but she wrote one about Jeff. It's called Space Torah, Astronaut Jeffrey Hoffman, Cosmic Mitzvah.
I have that book.
You have that book? Yeah. So it's a book about Jeff. And Rachelle wrote this book. Isn't it cool? It's cool to be here today, yeah. And she wrote the book, Passover on Everest. She's going to tell us a little bit about it in a second, because she's going to tell you why. Because it's coming. It's not ready yet. It's almost coming. But she did write another book that the name is She is a Mensch, that Nikki and her mother are part of this book. So now maybe you can say a few words about the books and the art, and before we start.
Yes, I am so very honored to have been able to bring your real life Jewish adventure stories into the world as children's books. I learned so much from doing all the research and writing about you, and I know our audience here is going to learn so much too. And I'm also very excited to share with you my books today. Space Torah, Astronaut Jeffrey Hoffman's Cosmic Mitzvah, and Passover on Everest, both of them illustrated by the amazing illustrator Craig Orbach, as well as She's a Mensch, which is She's a Mensch, Jewish Women Who Rock the World, about a bunch of really amazing Jewish women, including Nikki and her mom, who climbed the 7 summits. And that was illustrated by very talented illustrator Ariel Trunk, and also co-authored by another talented writer, Alana Baruch, who is with us here today as well. And we'll learn a little more about her later as well. So thank you very much. Yes, and it was, yes, and these are all published by an amazing, out-of-this-world publisher called Intergalactic Afikomen.
Excellent. So I want to start with Jeff. As I mentioned, Jeff went on 5 space missions. Jeff, can you tell us what is it that you love the most about being in space?
What I loved the most about being in space, I think, was to be able to float like you have no weight. I mean, if you've seen pictures of Superman flying, or you've ever wondered what it must feel like for a bird to be able to fly, and when you just float, it's like living in a different world. I think most astronauts would tell you that. The other thing, of course, that's so magnificent is the view you get of our planet Earth, which I never got tired of. I mean, sometimes people ask me what I did in my spare time up there. Like, did I read a book or watch a movie? No, I looked out the window and watched the Earth go by. So those are my 2 favorite things.
And Jeff, you were
but
also...
fixing the Hubble
yeah.
telescope was pretty cool as well.
And you also had the opportunity to do spacewalk, which means you went outside of the space shuttle. How can you tell us about this experience?
The first time I did that, I should say that every time we launched the space shuttle, 2 astronauts were trained how to use a spacesuit just if something would come up. And I was one of those 2 on our crew. But we weren't planning to do a spacewalk. But all we were planning to do was to go up for 4 days, launch 2 satellites, and come home. But the second satellite didn't turn on, and NASA came up with a plan for us, that means me and my partner, to go outside to do something to try to fix the satellite. But NASA had never done before, ever, a spacewalk that wasn't planned in advance. And so a lot of people thought they would never let us go out, but they did, and we did it. And so that kind of introduced me to spacewalking. And luckily enough, then when it was time to choose a crew for the Hubble Space Telescope, which was really critical, I got selected because I had done a spacewalk before and had done a good job.
And how does it feel to be outside from the space shuttle?
Nikki hopefully will talk about her feelings being on top of a really tall mountain. I've done some mountaineering as well, and I often see an analogy in the climbing a mountain in a sense, because there's a certain danger involved, and you have to do things very carefully. It's hard, but you take the risk and you do what you have to do, and you get on the summit. And when you're up there, there's this feeling of the world down below, and you're separate from it, and it's like your vision, you can see farther. And space, of course, we go up, Mount Everest is maybe 5 miles high, but in space, we're orbiting the Earth, we're 400 miles above the Earth. And so you can see much farther even, and so it's just an incredible feeling, and also because you're going so fast.
Next slide. Okay. Yes, Nikki, you have climbed to the highest mountains on every single continent, and there's something else that you did that makes it even more unusual, is that you did that with your mom. So I'd like to know what it is that you love the most about climbing mountains, and what made it so special to do something like this with your mom.
First of all, just in case there was a competition, Jeff is definitely taking Judaism to greater heights. So we've answered that.
But I'm envious of Nikki because I had to give up my high altitude mountain climbing, particularly once I moved to Houston to be an astronaut, and she's managed to do all these great climbs. So congratulations. So we can sort of envy each other, okay?
Okay, it's square then. So, you asked what's my favourite thing about being in the mountains. The first thing to say is that the top of Mount Everest is taller than where a plane flies. So if you've flown anywhere to visit a grandparent or to go on holiday, you stand taller than the height of where the plane when it's at cruising altitude. So it's very, very high, very, very high. You have to bring oxygen tanks because the human body wouldn't be able to live up at that height. You can't just jump out of a plane unless there's not enough air, absolutely. And so to stand where you're that high is amazing. Like Jeff said, you feel like you're in the holy of holies. You look out and all the mountains that are also very high, they look like tiny, tiny, tiny mountains. And so you feel this great privilege to be there. And so my greatest thing is that I was able to do these climbs, all 7 summits, with my mum. And we were an incredible team. And to climb the 7 summits took over 9 months. So I spent more time in a tent with my mum than I spent in her womb when she was pregnant with me. And that's been a phenomenal thing. We are in the Guinness Book of Records for being the first ever mother-daughter to climb Mount Everest and the 7 summits. So that's a record. And since then, there has been another mother-daughter that broke the record, but the first Jewish mother-daughter...
Wait, they can't break the record of being the first.
That have been the second, but, so far no one's broken another Jewish mother-daughter. We've held that.
Once you do something for the first time, they can never break your record, that record.
Yeah. So are there any mother-daughters in this room that are going to climb? Or...
So the answer's probably not. But Heather has a question.
when did you decide that you want to go to space?
I think she said, why did you want to
Why did you want to go to space?
I thought, when I was your age, there was lots there was shows on TV about people being in space, and there were articles in magazines and books and on television, and I thought space was neat. It was the future, and it was really exciting. Now, all the people who were astronauts early on, they were all pilots who worked for the Air Force or the Navy, and that wasn't something that I was going to do. So I didn't really think that I would be an astronaut, but I was interested in science as well. And I was interested in space, so I became an astronomer. And that's what I was doing until NASA said for the space shuttle they wanted not just pilots, but scientists and engineers. And so I was lucky enough to get selected to be an astronaut.
Excellent. And this is the page from the book. This is Nikki and her mother. And this is actually the other book, The Mensch. She's a Mensch that Rachelle wrote. And I know, Rachelle, you did it with your mom. So I think we have something with your daughter. With your daughter. She did it with her mom. You did it with your daughter. So is it fun to do it together?
Yes, well, this was really extraordinary for me, and I know Nikki knows exactly how fun it is to do, how special it is to do something like this, a mother and daughter together. And it actually happened during the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all stuck inside. And my daughter, who was stuck inside in her own lonely apartment, with nothing to do and nobody to see. She's a wonderful writer herself. She had never written a book, but she was always the person I would give my writing to and say, what do you think about this story? What would you do to make it better? So when she said to me, Mom, would you like to write a book together during COVID? I was so excited, and I said, what? Yes, please. And so we got on Zoom. And we did everything on Zoom, all of our research. We researched so many incredible Jewish women who would be in the book. And we wrote things in rhyme, and we had so much fun, and we laughed. And then we finally, when we finished it, we sent it to a publisher. And that was the very first book that this publisher accepted from me. And so it was, so Alana, maybe Alana, if you want to look back there, Alana, wave your hand and you'll see that wonderful, wonderful author who also happens to be a nurse.
So it's not only that you need to do it with your mom, sometimes you can do it with your dad, or sometimes you can do it with your siblings. And I actually, during COVID, wrote with my father his biography.
Did you?
So we also had this excitement. So now the next, for Jeff?
Oh, yes. I have another question for Jeff. You have taken many Jewish objects into space, such as a mezuzah, a dreidel, the Torah. Can you tell us about spinning the dreidel in space, and how does that differ from spinning a dreidel on Earth?
Well, a dreidel is a top, and when you spin it on Earth, gradually it slows down. Eventually it falls down on one of the sides, and if you can win or lose candy or money or whatever. Sometimes they used it for a game. So I was fortunate. The summer before I was on the mission to repair the Hubble Space Telescope, my family and I were in Israel, and an artist in Jerusalem who I met, we got from him a beautiful silver dreidel, which I took with me. And after all our work was done, we had a little bit of free time. So I took out the dreidel because it happened to be Hanukkah while I was up in space. I couldn't light candles, okay, because fire is dangerous when you're in a spacecraft. You have to be really careful. They do that sometimes. In fact, on my next flight after that, we had a firebox because we were doing some experiments with fire. And if I had the menorah on that flight, I could have lit the candles, but I didn't. So, but I could spin the dreidel. And of course, the funny thing is that the dreidel, it just keeps spinning, right? Because there's no gravity. And so what would you do? I mean, I asked myself that question. Well, by itself, it'll just keep spinning. So I don't know, maybe some of you have an idea. How could you make a game out of it? Because if it never falls down, then how do you know who wins and who loses? I don't know what the answer is, but you think about it. And if you come up with a good answer, will you tell your teacher, and your teacher will send it to Rachelle, who will send it to me? Because I would love to know.
And just that you know, everybody, you will all can get access to the film that we made. It's called the Space Torah Film, and there is a video recording of Jeff spinning the dreidel in space.
You can go on YouTube and look up dreidels in space, or Space Hanukkah, or Jeff Hoffman spins dreidel in space. Whatever you want, you'll find it. It's there.
Yeah, and now my next question is actually for Nikki. But by the way, Jeff also on his first flight celebrated Passover in space. He wanted to take matzah, but he's going to tell you what they told him in a second. But Nikki celebrated first Passover ever in space, not in space, in Everest. And I know it's very different from celebrating it in Australia or here. Here you go to the supermarket and you buy matzot and you do other things. And when you go to great heights, things are a little bit different. So maybe you can tell us, what is Passover on Everest?
So the first thing to say about climbing Mount Everest is that you don't just go from the bottom to the top. Remember, we talked about how there's very little oxygen. So you go up, then you come down a little bit, then you go up a bit more, then you come down. And that's your body's way of dealing with, the body does all these amazing, amazing things to adapt to this high altitude. And so you end up spending about 3 months in order to make it to the top of Everest. And you kind of climb Everest about 4 times to do that. So we're away from home for a long time, and at home we have a beautiful Pesach, where on the first night, and home being Australia, so very far from here, first night we would have all our family and all my cousins and my grandparents, and then on the second night we have all our friends, and anyone that speaks in a different language has to read the Haggadah in that language. So it's always fun. And so when we were on Everest, we were very, very homesick, and we said to our Sherpas, we're homesick, it's this very important Jewish Chag, and we would love to celebrate it in some way. And when you're on Everest, your team is your team. It's so important that you work together as a team. And so the team got right behind us, and they said, okay, well, what does Pesach look like? And so we said, okay, well, we have boiled eggs. And they said, well, that's easy because we've carried chickens up to base camp, and the chickens will lay some eggs, and we'll use those chickens for boiled eggs. And then, all the food has to be carried up. So we had beautiful vacuum sealed New Zealand lamb. And so that was saved for a special occasion. And clearly Pesach was a special occasion. So they said, okay, we can have this special lamb, which we were actually saving for just before the summit, but Pesach got ahead of that. And then we didn't have matzah like Jeff, so we had what the Nepalis called chapatis, which are like little flatbreads, and we all sat around the table and we told the story of Pesach with the Sherpas and with the climb team from around the world. And it was just such a beautiful experience to be so close to Hashem, to be on Mount Everest, and to be with our team who are our family then. And we got on the satellite phone and we said hello to my grandparents and hello to my dad and my brother. And so it was a very, very special time.
And maybe, Jeff, you can tell us about Passover in space.
Well, actually, this was before my first flight, which was back in 1985. It's a long time ago. And it was occurring during Passover. Now, 1 week before launch, the crew goes into a medical quarantine so that we don't get exposed to common cold germs. And so I brought some matzah with me into quarantine. Before a flight, you get to sample all of the different foods that NASA has available, and you sort of choose your menu. But my flight had been postponed several times, so I didn't realize until just before we were ready to go that it was going to be during Passover. So I took my matzah into the quarantine, and the woman who was in charge of food for the space shuttle was there, and I showed her what I was eating and explained that it was a special bread for the Jewish holiday of Passover. Could I take some with me on the shuttle? And she picked it up and broke it. And of course, what happens normally when you break matzah? It makes lots of crumbs. Crumbs are not good in space because here on Earth, the crumbs fall on the floor and you can vacuum them up. And in space, they just float around and you can breathe them in, which is not so good, really. And so my matzah was not allowed to fly. However, I have to say, and I if the opportunity comes up, I've told the Chabad rabbi this already, but for the last few years, he's sent me some special matzah. It's round, handmade matzah. And I found that when you break that matzah, it does not make crumbs. And so I've told him, actually, that I would be willing to certify that as space-qualified matzah. But I didn't have that available when I was flying.
Excellent. And the next question is actually for Nikki and Jeff.
Yes. We would like to know any funny stories you have about your experience. And I guess we'll start with Nikki, climbing Mount Everest, any of the experience there, or any of the other mountains you climb.
So one story that ended up being quite funny was when we climbed Aconcagua, which is the tallest mountain in South America. We were very close to, achieving the 7 summits. This was before Everest, and it was all going well, and we decided to take this special behind the mountain route, which is a little bit harder. And so we were almost at the top, and everything freezes up there. So I took a bite into like a muesli bar, and I chipped my tooth. And they said, you're up at that altitude, nothing heals, and you might get an infection. If you get an infection in your mouth, then we can't get you down. And so we had to turn around, and it was devastating because we'd worked so hard. So we get turned around and we get evacuated by mule. So there we are, these big mountaineers were evacuated by mule, and everyone's laughing. I'll go to one of those dentists where they'll just pull my teeth out, and I'm terrified. But we end up going to a fantastic dentist. They fix my tooth, and we end up going back up the normal route. And by this stage, we're wonderfully acclimatized, everything's fabulous, and we go with the local, we've become now friends with all the mule operators, we go with the local mule guide. And the local mule guide is this Israeli man who's moved to Argentina, who sounds exactly like our rabbi in Sydney. And so we become really close friends with him and have this fabulous time going up this mountain. And we've stayed very close with him. So it's just a funny twist and turn that kind of life took for us.
Something funny. Well, funny and very unexpected. There's no weather up in space, right? I mean, it's a vacuum outside your spaceship. But on the space shuttle, we actually made a lot of water in order to have our electricity. And we had more water than we could actually drink or use, even to wash and things. So we would just dump it overboard into the vacuum of space. Well, when the water hits the vacuum of space, it freezes into snow. And so you see this beautiful stream of snow particles going out from the shuttle, and you sort of get used to that. But once, and only once in all my flights did this happen. We went around the world, and 90 minutes later, just because of the direction that we had sent out all of this snow, we flew up through it, and so it looked like the snow was actually coming down. And so it was like looking out the window on a winter day and seeing the snowfall outside. Of course, I couldn't go out with a sled or anything, but it was really a bizarre moment and very beautiful.
So actually I have one last question before we open it for a question from you. When I met Jeff in 2016, he shared with us a video from his fifth flight from 1996, where he went on Space Shuttle Columbia, and he actually took with him the first Torah to space. And one of the sentences that he said that really was very strong for me, resonated with me, he said, "We astronauts are human beings, and when we travel, like all explorers, we take with us part of our culture and history and traditions." So Jeff, you took with you your culture and history and tradition, and also Nikki, but I know that the Torah was something different. You take sometimes things to celebrate, like you took to celebrate Passover, Nikki, and you took with you mezuzot, and you took other things, but there was an added value of taking the Torah. Can you share with us what was special about the Torah?
Well, what I've said on several occasions when people ask, what did it mean to take a Torah into space? We do take a lot of things. Like I took the flag of one of my son's Boy Scout troops into space, and then I gave it back to them. This flag is really special. It's been in space. That's really cool. And we do that with a lot of things. But and I don't know, maybe the mezuzot are special now that they've been in space. But the Torah is so special in and of itself. It's a holy document. And so bringing that up into space, as a Jew, as a human being, for me, well, first of all, what fascinated me was that Judaism is a really ancient tradition, and here it is together with spaceflight, which for me always represented the future. And so it was also taking the Torah into the future. And of course, now the Torah makes then space something special and comes back, and now children in the synagogue where the Space Torah lives continue to use it for their Hebrew, their bar and bat mitzvahs. And so it takes Torah forward into the future. So it has many meanings and significance, I think, to different people, but that's some of the things that it meant for me.
And this is actually one of the pages from the book that Rachelle wrote. And this is when you read from the Torah, when you read Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And here is actually the original photo from this video recording. And now I know that you all have questions. It can be for any one of us. So let's start. Yes.
How do you sleep in a rocket ship?
Well, when you're floating around, I actually could fall asleep just when I was floating. But the problem there is eventually you'll float and you'll bump against the wall or you'll bump against somebody else, and that would wake people up. So you get in a sleeping bag, and I just tied myself loosely, and I would just go to sleep in the sleeping bag. Now, some people didn't feel comfortable doing that, and they wanted to strap themselves to the wall. And that way there was pressure on their back, and it sort of gives the illusion that you're lying in a bed. Sleep is very personal. I had no trouble sleeping. I slept really well up in space. Very comfortable. I love being weightless. I love floating. So
Nice. Yes, we have one here. You want to ask?
I saw the Torah that was on the computer.
You saw the Torah?
Jack saw the film.
You saw the film?
And I also saw it at the synagogue too.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Which synagogue?
I forget what it was.
Okay.
Very nice. Yes.
Jack, you're right. The Torah that the astronaut brings to space looks exactly the same like the Torah that we have even at Tot Shabbat.
No.
This with the silver.
But the one big difference, if you look up here, it has the rimonim are in the shape of a shuttle. But originally it wasn't like this, Jeff.
That was the congregation who hosts now where it lives. They had a big celebration for the 20th anniversary of the flight, which was we flew in 1996. So in 2016 we had down in Houston. We had a lovely celebration, and the congregation, some people there donated those beautiful silver shuttles, which now are ornamenting the
Jack, do you see
Space
that?
Torah.
It's on top of the Torah on the two,
here.
Sticks
Here.
that hold the Torah. There's like a little silver space shuttle.
You
To
see here?
Remind everyone that this Torah went to space. Noga, do you have a question?
The base of the shuttle, when it was built, when it was architected, so they knew everything that was going on, right? When they built the base, before this was architected, how did they think of how to build the base? Like, did they have to choose between balance and strongness? Did they have to choose between?
Well, you're asking very good questions, and actually, I'm a professor now at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, we call it, and that's one of the things that we teach students how to do is how to design airplanes and how to design rockets. And they have to ask the same sort of questions you do. You have to balance it. You're trying to launch something into space. You want it to be really light, right? Because you got to lift it with a rocket. So it has to be lightweight, but it also has to be strong because the rocket is shaking and everything. So yeah, that's a special type of thing that we teach our students, and that's a good question.
Nice. You have a question?
When you go to space or when you go on the highest mountains, when you get to like high altitudes, how does it feel to like be in high altitudes with no air in anything, and like you just having a mask on you with a bunch of oxygen?
I'm going to let Nikki answer that because, see, we carry our air with us into space, and when I was inside the space shuttle or even out in a spacesuit, I had all the oxygen that I needed, but Nikki may not have had all the oxygen she needed sometimes.
So when you climb a peak above 7,000 meters, you need oxygen, and it's not just given to you, you have to carry it on your back. So you have to calculate exactly how much oxygen you need, and then you have to carry it up. And even then, you don't feel very well. They've done tests where they test the oxygen of high altitude mountaineers, and it's like being a very, very sick patient in the hospital. But because you go up and down, your body is so clever. It makes new red blood cells, which help you carry oxygen. It does all these clever things to make you adapt so that you're like superhuman. And when you come back down to sea level, you feel amazing because you're used to being at this very high level and your body has to adapt.
Somebody that didn't have a
Theo,
chance?
Theo, you have a question?
When does space start?
Very good question. How high? Let me ask some of you a question. How high do you have to go to be in space?
100 kilometers.
100 kilometers? Anything else?
100 kilometers. 5,000 kilometers.
Okay. Actually, the answer is there is no one place where, like, you come up to a fence and it says, oh, space begins right now. You know, you go up through the atmosphere. I mean, even on top of Mount Everest, where Nikki was, 2/3 of the atmosphere, more than half of the atmosphere is down below you. And by the time you can go even higher, if you go up in a balloon, you can get up maybe to 100,000 feet, and almost all the atmosphere is below you. But with a rocket, you've got to go even higher, because even very, very thin atmosphere, because the atmosphere keeps on going, it just gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And so once you're a few hundred miles or a few hundred kilometers above the surface of the Earth, then the air is thin enough that you can stay in orbit around the Earth. If you're closer than that, the air will slow you down and you'll come back to Earth. But on the other hand, there is something called the von Karman line, which is at 100 kilometers, 60 miles roughly, sometimes they say 50 miles. And if you go above that line, you can say that you've been in space. You haven't been in orbit necessarily, but you've been in space. So there's no one place where space begins, and people keep on asking that question, which is a good one.
So we're going to have one last question, and then if people are interested in the books or to talk to us or take some pictures, we can do that.
Let's answer this question, and then Rachelle, I'm wondering if while we look at the books and maybe ask questions, if we can maybe
Yes, I
get
can.
one of the videos.
Yes, I can do. I can have the dreidel.
That was our
Yeah,
fault. Porter takes
Yeah,
responsibility
it's okay.
for losing the remote.
That's okay.
Lee, do you want to ask your question?
Did you like sleeping in outer space?
I loved it. I would love to go again if I had a chance.
Would you like to sleep there more than here?
Would I like to what?
I heard that you have to sleep upside down.
Well, the only problem about being in space, though, is, I mean, it's wonderful to do it for a week or two. But if you're there for a really long time, your body actually doesn't really do so well in the long term. I mean, your bones get soft and your muscles get weak, so you really have to do a lot of exercise, and it's hard. The people who live up on the space station now, when they're up there for 6 months or a year, they have to spend 2 to 3 hours every day doing really hard exercise. So it's hard work if you want to stay up in space for a long time and be healthy. But, you know, your body, you need to take care of your body, just like on the ground you need to get exercise.
We have one last question over here.
Okay.
How much time does it take to
How much time does it take to get from the ground up to orbit? About 8.5 minutes. And during that time, you go from 0 miles an hour to about just under 18,000 miles an hour, because that's how fast you have to be if you want to stay in orbit.